So I have no problem admitting to the fact that this time of year, right now we are in January, is just about my least favorite time of year to take photographs. And it has not something to do with it being winter in and of itself. I wish there was more snow, but it's just because, like, you know, nature is basically dead at this time of year. I love summer, and I love the later part of summer and the early part of spring, especially because of all the fog and, like, you know, heather blooming and all the good stuff there. However, basically when you have a career, as I do, taking landscape photos and making landscape photography videos, I personally want to be able to take great photos all year round, no matter the season and more or less no matter the weather. And in this video I want to go through some simple steps that you can take so that you can actually take good photos at the worst time of the year, or at least what I consider to be the worst time of year. I have made videos about how to take good summer photos. I know some of you struggle a lot during summer. Personally, the worst time of year for me to take photos is usually after the autumn colors, so late November, December, January, February and March, unless there is snow. But right now, as you can see, there's absolutely no snow whatsoever around here. It is about 5 degrees Celsius. But today I have some shifting weather, which makes for great light. And great light is so important. And the first step is to benefit from those days. Go out in stormy days, go out in stormy weather, go out in weather where there are snow showers, rain showers coming in and out, and then the sun can break through and you get that changing weather throughout the day. A lot of changing weather. And I have stopped by this location here to photograph this winding road. The sun is somewhat up there, and from time to time it throws in some light into this scene right here. And that is what I'm going to capture. So first and foremost, the first step is to get that beautiful light. Now, because the weather is changing as much as it is, I just captured the photo. It's very, very simple composition. So vertical composition, as you can see here, I'm shooting at f16, ISO 100, and I make sure that I have my blinkies on, my zebra stripes, so I make sure that I don't overexpose or underexpose the photo. Now you can see I just captured the photo here. So I had a little bit of sunlight coming in from the right side, and that lit up some of the lower clouds. And I have like this, well, it's very hard for you to see. There we go. I have this very nice stripe in the clouds right there. And I actually think that made up for a fairly interesting sky for this particular scene here. Obviously you can have a lot of different kinds of clouds and skies for a shot like this, because it is mainly the foreground that makes up the photo, or at least my subject is the road. And I'm driving around today just in the landscape. I have a few different places I want to visit, and it is to find, or not find, but go and photograph some different interesting subjects. So here is the first photo. So speaking of subjects, when we do it from the perspective of it being like the worst time of the year and there's not really anything interesting when it comes to the season, then for the most part I really like photographing human stuff and human buildings, roads and so forth, as you can see in the previous photo. And right now I have come out to this little interesting hut out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. I've of course done my research from home. I've been aware about this hut for a little bit more than a year, and why not use this opportunity to go and photograph it? Another thing you can do in regard to subjects, if you want to include a little bit more of, a natural subject, when that is the time to go to, Iceland, photograph big epic waterfalls, interesting mountains, glaciers. Including subjects in your photos is not always enough. It usually also has to be an interesting subject, and that is where Iceland, the American West, the Faroe Islands, where I've just been, comes into play. Because there it is less about the weather, you're less dependent on the weather, and it's mainly just a question about going there, waiting for the light to manifest, and then get the photo. Here's a few of the photos I've taken in the Faroe Islands back in December, and yeah, you don't really need to have those absolutely incredible conditions, that incredible light. Of course, it always helps with incredible light, but nevertheless, the point is that the landscape does most of the work for you. Whereas here in Denmark, when you don't have those really characteristic, standing out subjects, you have to work a little bit more for it yourself. So I've walked a little bit around the hut to try and find a good perspective, and I've come to the other side. And I have the light coming in over here, so the clouds are moving this way and covering the sun right now. But it was just like, lighting up the scene with the hut right here. And the most beautiful light. And you can see if I go really far down, you can get a really nice reflection of this little hut right here. And admittedly, the hut is in and of itself not particularly interesting. But when you combine it with the gorgeous light and this huge open area, you get this very dramatic yet simple and minimalist photo. So the second step is definitely to go for a subject and make sure that that subject is interesting in and of itself. If it's not interesting in and of itself, make sure that you use the conditions to your advantage so that it lifts up that subject. Now, it doesn't have to be like, great light. It has to be beneficial light, what I usually say. That great light, like what is great light? It has to be beneficial light to the scene you're photographing. And in this case with the side light, great, beautiful. It could also have worked with a gray covered background, and then you would get that contrast between the red hut and a more gray and moody sky. So in that way, two completely different photos, but I would say that they would probably both work. Now I'm going to play a little bit more around here in this area, but I'm not sure I'm going to get anything better, at least not right now, because the sun has been covered up. The clouds, though, are absolutely gorgeous. Also, one thing, it's always good to bring wellies. You never know when you're going to have to stand in some water. So yeah, beautiful little hut, and I actually think I came away with a really, really nice photo. So here it is. So the next step is, of course, to own that composition. And I usually say that you need a subject, which we have already discussed. Then of course you need to balance your photo. You need to use some kind of leading elements, or at least make your subject stand out. What I usually do not talk about is the strength of using different focal lengths. As I have already said, like I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and you can see the hut is over here. However, there are some hills here in the background. There's a town up here, and generally, when it comes to this photo, I want to give that impression that we are out in the middle of nowhere. So for the most part, I do not want to include that background town. Now, when you have seen a lot of my photos from Iceland and the Faroe Islands and talk a lot about lens compression, that we want to have the background element, which is usually a big sea stack or waterfall, you want it to appear larger in the scene. In this particular case, I want the background to be smaller in the scene. And for a subject in the background to appear smaller, you have to do the opposite. You have to go closer and then use a wider focal length. That was why I, in the previous photo, used 16mm. I used a very wide angle lens so that the background was very small. You probably didn't even see the background. Try to jump back and see how I used the wide angle to make the background very, very small. I walked around the lake now, and I'm trying to see if I can shoot the hut from the other side. But the problem is that I'm now having such a large distance between me and the small hut that the background becomes quite large when I zoom in. And you can see here's an example from just before, and here is another example. And even though the background and the clouds are beautiful and it's interesting, I have, like, you know, town and factories in the background, and the hut is not really, it's standing out, there's no doubt about that, that's the subject of the scene, but the background is a little bit too messy and a little bit too, yeah, you know, it's a city, it's a town, and I do not want to include that in this photo. So I don't really think that I can pull much more out of the composition, at least not on this side of the lake. But I'm already quite satisfied with the first photo I got here. So I'll just wait around a little bit more and see if the weather changes, else I will move on to the next location. If you struggle with composition in landscape photography, be sure to pick up my 2 ebooks on exactly that topic. Instead of talking about compositional rules, I prefer the term compositional tools, as these techniques are some you can choose to use to tell your story or up the aesthetics. I have designed the ebooks to be very easy to read with minimal text and loads of examples as to get to the point fast. Both ebooks, Landscape Composition 1 and 2, has loads of 5-star reviews. Thank you very much to all of you who have already got them, and if you are still in doubt, you can check out the 2 free light versions first. You will find the links to both the free light versions and the full versions in the description of this video. So the hardest part about making these vlogs is to both vlog and photograph at once. So the light was just out, and the thing is that the light changes a lot today, and I just had to run for it to get this shot. But I came back around the lake and came back to here, and I knew about this composition from when I just arrived, and I saw that there was light on the house, and then I have, of course, the reflection yet again, and now I have the lines out here and here leading into the house. I am not sure it is a stronger photo than the first one I got, but I like it, so here it is. So as you can see, I'm back in the car and I just had to like hurry so much because suddenly the sun just came out and it was in the middle of a rain shower and everything just turned like golden and there was beautiful light everywhere and there was rain everywhere. And yeah, I came by this beautiful little church and I simply couldn't film and take photos at once. And this is kind of like both step 4, yet also not really a step in and of itself, because it kind of counts like all year. But no matter what time of year, whether it's the worst time of year or not, you firstly always have to be ready to jump on the opportunity when it presents itself, because the weather always changes quite fast. So when you see it, go for it. So just have to drive in fast and like run out along a field. And yeah, like now my feet are wet because I wasn't that ready. My camera was ready. And that is step 4, like always have your settings in mind. How do you want to capture your photo? No matter if you want to focus or if you want to, like, you know, just work with the scene and dial in and make some kind of focus tag or something like that. So in the case, as you can see in this photo here, that's the final capture. I had all the rain in front, so I had to like really enlarge the screen, zoom in and make sure that I was focusing on the church, because it's the church I wanted to be in focus. So first I focused, that's very important. And then I of course dialed in the settings I wanted to use. Because there was so much rain and the rain just hammered me full frontal, I had to, you know, wipe the camera each time I was taking a photo. And I was shooting at either 11 or f16, simply just to make sure that I didn't get too much vignette in the photo. I always try to aim for f16 when I'm shooting with my Tamron 28 to 200 millimeter. And since there was so much light, I didn't really have to worry too much about the shutter speed. However, I was shooting in manual because I was covering the front of the lens before I started shooting, as to not get too many raindrops onto the front onto the lens before I started photographing, simply just to get as clean a shot as possible. Because when you're shooting at the lower apertures like f11, f16, you very easily get those raindrops on the front element. Wow, I'm blabbering. But that was step 4. You absolutely need to be sure to have your stuff ready, and you need to own those settings. And it's hard for me to sit here and say that you always need to use these settings or these settings, because it utterly depends on the scene and the amount of available light that you have. But if you are in doubt, be sure to check out my video about settings. I'll link to it up here or here, I don't remember, but anyway, let's see if I can get a final photo today, and then we can talk about step 5. Sadly, I didn't manage to pull anything more out of the day, but I do think I came away with 3 great photos. The 5th and final step to get good photos in the worst time of the year is of course knowing how to edit them. So I'll just cover my main editing thoughts and techniques on these photos. As with all RAW files, they are very flat and boring straight out of camera and doesn't resemble reality whatsoever. So my main objective is always to bring back the natural contrast and then highlight and bring attention to the elements of the scene I find interesting. In this photo it is of course the gravel road and interesting clouds. I could do most of the job in camera raw by globally bringing down the highlights, upping the shadows and adding contrast. On top of that, I also added contrast to the sky with a linear gradient filter, and I used the brush tool with a lot of clarity to make the road brighter. I used a few more local edits to soften different parts of the photo in both Camera Raw and Photoshop before denoising it with Topaz Denoise AI via Photoshop. The second image was all about balancing the tones between the glow from the left and the house, as to make sure the attention is on the house. I did so by using linear gradient filters to darken the sky, introducing a bit more vignetting, upping the shadows to brighten the house, and using the HSL sliders to bring out a bit more color and luminance of the house. On top of that, I also made sure to correct the geometry of the house to make the wall straight. I finished the photo off in Photoshop with some topaz denoising and a few more global adjustments, and of course a cleaning of the foreground to remove the most distracting grass. In the third photo I also balanced out the tones and colors and removed some distractions. But my main goal was to bring out the beautiful light on the foreground, which I did with some local adjustments where I especially upped the whites and introduced a bit of clarity to target those highlights. As with the other photos, I finished this one off in Photoshop. These and many more techniques and editing philosophies are some I cover in my huge Photoshop for Landscape Photographers post-processing course. I've designed the course as for all to get started with Photoshop, no matter if you're an avid user of Lightroom or a beginner. The full course is 29 plus videos and 19 plus hours in total, and I've included the files for you to follow along. Be sure to use the YouTube discount code shown in the description of the video to save some money. Also check out the mentioned ebooks if you want to learn more about composition in landscape photography. As per always, I'd highly appreciate both a like and a comment, and I hope you learned a thing or two or got some inspiration for your own landscape photography.